There is a man I find myself returning to, year after year, and I'm still not entirely sure how to explain him. No statue in Whitehall, no grand tomb in Westminster, just a small country churchyard in Morton, Dorset, and a quiet stone, and that is all. And yet, every single border on the map of the modern Middle East, every line you have ever traced on a screen, bears the fingerprints of this slight, soft-spoken Englishman who spoke Arabic with a poet's ear and a thief's cunning. I am not sure history has fully decided what to do with him yet. At Arthur's Living History, we rebuild forgotten worlds frame by frame, training AI on the photographs, diaries, and faded sketches of the past until the silence begins to move again. Carchemish, northern Syria, 1911. A young archaeologist with sun-bleached hair is kneeling in red dust, brushing earth away from the paw of a Hittite lion older than scripture. He is 23, 5'5", narrow-shouldered, eyes the color of a winter sea. His tunic is loose, his sandals are local, his Arabic is improving by the week. The men of the dig call him El Orens, because their tongues will not quite bend around his English name, Thomas Edward Lawrence. Oxford-educated, Welsh-born, illegitimate, though almost no one back in Britain knows that yet. He sleeps on a camp bed under a thin canvas, listens to the night wind off the Euphrates, and writes long lyrical letters home about pomegranate trees and Bedouin courtesy. He befriends a young Arab water boy named Salim Ahmed, Dahum to the dig, 14 years old, sharp-eyed, quick to laugh. A friendship Lawrence will quietly mourn in coded verse for the rest of his life. He does not yet know he is being watched. Because British military intelligence has noticed this peculiar young man who maps ruins with the precision of a surveyor and rides camels like a Hashemite. And by 1914, with Europe sliding into the Great Catastrophe, the War Office quietly pulls him into Cairo. The Savoy Hotel, requisitioned as British headquarters, smells of cigarette smoke and lemon polish. Fans turn slowly overhead. Lawrence wears an ill-fitting khaki uniform, refuses to salute properly, and irritates almost every superior officer who meets him. But he knows the desert. He knows the tribes. He knows the names. Up in the Arab Bureau, a clandestine intelligence cell tucked above the Nile, in a row of rooms thick with maps and pipe smoke, men like Gilbert Clayton and Ronald Storrs are plotting something audacious. They want to ignite a revolt inside the Ottoman Empire itself. Stay with me on the geography for a second. The Ottomans, allied with Germany, hold the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. They have ruled Arab lands for 4 centuries. If the Arabs can be persuaded to rise against Istanbul, the entire eastern flank of the war pivots. Britain spends years debating it, planning it, whispering about it in panelled rooms in London. Lawrence will spend a few weeks deciding it must happen now. The revolt begins on the 10th of June, 1916. Sharif Hussein of Mecca, an old man with a long white beard and the political instincts of a chess grandmaster, fires his rifle skyward from a window of his palace, the agreed signal that the rising is real. The shutters creak, the flag rises, the desert listens. October of that same year. A small steamer crosses the Red Sea. The water is the color of polished tin. Lawrence steps ashore at Jeddah in his ill-pressed uniform and rides inland to meet a man he believes can change everything. Faisal ibn Hussein, son of the Sharif, a tall, hawk-eyed prince of 31 with a black beard and tired eyes. They meet in a tent of woven goat hair near Hamra. The light comes through the weave, gold and pale. Faisal sits on a thin carpet. Coffee is poured. Cardamom hangs in the air. Lawrence writes later that he knew, in that moment, he had found his prophet. And honestly, that part still stops me. A young Englishman, barely 28, deciding within a single afternoon that he can pin the future of an Arab uprising on one man across a coffee tray. There is a confidence in that which is either madness or magic. Maybe a little of both. What follows is one of the strangest military partnerships in modern history. Lawrence trades his uniform for white silk robes and a golden agal, gifts from Faisal, partly out of practicality, partly out of theatre. The Bedouin trust him more in their own dress. British officers in Cairo find him ridiculous. He does not care. He rides north with Hawittat raiders, Harith tribesmen, men whose loyalties shift like dunes. He learns their poetry, he memorizes their lineages, he sleeps 3 hours a night and writes by candle stub. The desert is unforgiving. By noon, the metal of a rifle barrel is too hot to touch. By midnight, the cold cracks the skin on a man's hands. Lawrence loses weight he cannot afford to lose. His feet split open in the salt flats. He keeps going. Then comes Aqaba. Aqaba is the puzzle no European general has solved. A small Ottoman port on the Red Sea, guarded by guns that face only seaward, because no sane army would ever attack from the desert behind it. To reach Aqaba overland, you must cross the Nefud, a furnace of pale sand where the wells lie 2 days apart, and a single miscalculation finishes a column of men. It has never been done in summer. Lawrence and Auda Abu Tayi, a legendary Hawittat chieftain with a face like cracked leather and a voice like grinding stone, decide to do exactly that. They ride for weeks. 600 miles through country the Ottomans have written off as uncrossable. The sun bleaches the saddles white. Camel sores open and refuse to close. Water runs out twice. One man slips from his camel, exhausted, and is left behind in the dunes. Lawrence turns back alone, in the dark, and finds him, by following a single set of footprints in moonlit sand. The men remember it. It binds them to him in a way no British medal ever could. On the 6th of July, 1917, the Arab force comes down from the hills behind Aqaba like something out of scripture, robes streaming, camels at a gallop, and the Ottoman garrison turns its useless seaward guns and surrenders almost without a fight. Lawrence rides into the abandoned town. The Red Sea glitters in front of him. He has just changed the war. Back in Cairo, General Allenby looks at this sunburnt apparition in stained robes standing in his office and decides, on the spot, to give him whatever he wants. What Lawrence wants is dynamite. The Hejaz Railway runs from Damascus to Medina, 800 miles of single-track steel that the Ottomans depend on to feed their southern army. Lawrence's plan is elegant and merciless. Do not finish the line. Cripple it again and again and again, so that the Ottomans have to pour men and supplies into endlessly repairing it, draining their strength into the sand. A train derailed on a Tuesday means 1,000 soldiers stuck in repair gangs by Friday. His raiders become artists of demolition. He calculates the charges himself, scribbling timing diagrams in the margins of looted Ottoman ledgers. His preferred technique, something called the tulip charge, a small device that buckles a rail upward without shattering it, is still cited in military demolition manuals a century later. The men learn to bury Lee Enfield cartridges as detonators. They learn to twist the rails just enough that a locomotive jumps without warning. The smell of cordite mixes with juniper smoke. The boom rolls across empty wadis. And here is the part I find genuinely strange. This is one of the most influential guerrilla campaigns ever conducted in modern warfare, and almost no one outside specialist circles can name a single raid from it. The textbooks quote him in footnotes. The histories skip past the desert and onto the trenches. It is the kind of story that hides in plain sight. There are scenes from this period that historians still piece together carefully, because Lawrence himself struggled to write them down. The war turns ugly in a way he will carry the rest of his life. At Deraa, in late 1917, he is detained by Ottoman troops while scouting in disguise, and what happens in that guardhouse, what he later describes in coded, anguished pages, leaves him a different man. He does not speak of it directly for years. When he finally does, in his memoir, the prose breaks apart. The confident young raider is gone. The man who comes out of Deraa is harder, colder, and quietly fractured in a place no surgeon could ever reach. The desert war pushes north. Faisal's army swells from a few hundred to tens of thousands. Tribal banners, green, white, scarlet, snap above the dust. By autumn 1918, the Ottoman line is collapsing. Damascus, jewel of the Levant, ancient beyond memory, falls to the Arab advance on the 1st of October. Lawrence rides into the city in a battered Rolls-Royce armoured car. He had a real fondness for them, by the way. He called the one he drove Blue Mist, and he loved the way her engine sounded across the basalt roads. The streets are choked with cheering crowds, fluttering flags, and the perfume of jasmine from courtyard walls. The bells of the Umayyad Mosque toll. Children chase the armoured cars. A woman on a high balcony weeps for a son who has not come home from the north. For a single shimmering afternoon, the dream looks real. An Arab government in Damascus, a united Arab nation stretching from Aleppo to Aden, a new map drawn by the people who actually live on it. But something is already moving in the corridors of London and Paris that none of these cheering men in the Damascus square can see. And this is the part I cannot quite forgive history for. 2 years earlier, in secret, a British diplomat named Mark Sykes and a French diplomat named François-Georges Picot had quietly carved the Arab lands between their two empires with a pencil and a ruler. France would take Syria and Lebanon. Britain would take Iraq and Palestine. The Arabs, the ones who had been promised independence in return for revolt, would receive a small portion of what had been pledged, and even that under European tutelage. Lawrence has known about the Sykes-Picot Agreement for over a year. He has watched Faisal trust him. He has not stopped him. That part of the story makes me uneasy every single time I revisit it. He was a man caught between two flags, and he chose to keep riding because he convinced himself he could still win the peace at the end of it. He could not. January 1919, Paris. The Versailles Peace Conference. Lawrence appears in the corridors of the Quai d'Orsay, wearing his Arab headdress over a British uniform. A one-man scandal, a walking statement, photographed everywhere he turns. He is photographed beside Faisal, who has come to plead the Arab case before the great powers. They wait in marble antechambers that smell of beeswax and old leather. They are kept waiting a long time. Diplomats brush past them in tailcoats. Aides shake their heads when asked when the council might receive them. Days pass, weeks. The decision has already been made. France takes Syria by force in 1920, throwing Faisal off the throne the Arab Revolt had won him in Damascus. Britain installs him, almost as compensation, on the new throne of Iraq, a country invented for him out of 3 Ottoman provinces with a stroke of a London pen. His brother Abdullah is given the new Emirate of Transjordan. Palestine is held under British mandate, with the Balfour Declaration already promising it to 2 peoples at once. The borders being drawn in those rooms, Borders that ignore tribe, language, faith, and water are the borders we still argue about today. You can stand in Amman right now and order coffee in a cafe whose street grid was inked at a table in Versailles by men who had never set foot in the city. Lawrence resigns from everything. He just walks away. He hands back his medals to a startled royal aide and walks out. He refuses a knighthood from King George V, leaving the king holding the empty ribbon. A small, almost comic moment of mutiny that the British court never quite forgives. He writes 7 Pillars of Wisdom, a vast, scorched, beautiful memoir, partly true, partly mythologized, painfully honest about his own role and his own betrayals. He calls himself, in its pages, an imposter. Imagine being the man who shaped a war and feeling every single morning afterwards like a fraud. I find that level of private reckoning very rare in any century. So he tries to vanish. He enlists in the Royal Air Force under a false name, John Hume Ross. When the newspapers find him, he flees again, this time into the Tank Corps as Private T.E. Shaw. He polishes engines. He scrubs barrack floors. The man who walked into Damascus in white silk now scrubs latrines and seems, for the first time in years, almost at peace. He rides motorcycles in his spare time, Brougham Superiors, hand-built in Nottingham, the fastest production bike of the age, fast enough to terrify his friends. He owns 7 of them across his lifetime, each one named, in his quiet, private way, George. He writes letters to George Bernard Shaw, to Thomas Hardy, to E.M. Forster, a quiet, brilliant correspondence that historians still mine for clues to the man behind the legend. Then, the morning of the 13th of May, 1935. A narrow Dorset lane, hedgerows in early summer leaf, the air sweet with hawthorn. Lawrence is riding home from posting a telegram to a friend, a small black and tan motorcycle scarf flapping at his neck. 2 boys on bicycles round a dip in the road. He swerves to avoid them. The motorcycle leaves the lane. He is taken to Bovington Camp Hospital, unconscious. 6 days later, on the 19th of May, his story ends. He is 46. The 2 boys are unharmed. And here is the bit that always astonishes me. One of the young doctors who tended him that week, an army neurosurgeon named Hugh Cairns, is so shaken by the case that he begins a long, quiet research program into head protection for motorcyclists. The result, years later, is the modern motorcycle helmet. If you have ever buckled one on, you are touching the legacy of a man who once rode into Damascus. A life that ended on a country lane, rippling out into helmets on a Tokyo street, on a Lagos street, on yours. That moves me every time I sit with it. Winston Churchill weeps openly at the memorial service. Hardy sends a wreath. Forster writes that the country has lost a strange, irreplaceable boy who never quite grew up and yet aged 1,000 years inside. The borders remained. They remain still. Faisal reigns in Baghdad until 1933, when his story ends in Switzerland under circumstances historians still debate. Abdullah's line continues in Jordan to this day. The Grand Sharifate of Mecca falls in 1925 to the rising Saud family, the kingdom now known as Saudi Arabia. And in 1,000 classrooms across the Arab world, the name Lawrence is taught as something complicated, part liberator, part deceiver, part ghost of a promise that was never kept. He had once written, in a letter to a friend, that he was riding for a cause he believed in with one hand on a bridle and the other on a knife held against his own conscience. He never let go of either. That is the strange power of his story. He was not a great general. He was not a hero in the polished bronze sense. He was a small, intense, contradictory man with a gift for languages and a willingness to be uncomfortable longer than anyone else in the room. And with those two qualities and a great deal of dynamite, he helped end an empire that had stood for 6 centuries. I think about him often, about the silences in his letters, about what he must have seen in Faisal's eyes when the news from Paris finally reached him. We hope this one stayed with you the way it stays with us. We are Arthur's living history, a small crew bringing these worlds back from the silence. And honestly, we are only getting started. Better, bolder, deeper work is coming. Tell us in the comments which forgotten figure you would like us to dust off next, which century you would like us to walk you into, which name keeps tugging at your sleeve from the back of a history book. If this story moved you, leave a quiet word below. Subscribe if you would like to ride with us through the lanes and the legends, the dust and the desert, the smoke and the story. Because history, properly told, does not sleep. It saddles up, and so do we.